Imagine a world where colossal herbivores stroll beside skyscrapers, where fierce predators rule the jungle, and where human civilization must reckon with the presence of a creature the size of a bus. In this video, I'll take you on a journey into an alternate reality where the course of Earth's history took a different turn. The catastrophic impact that ended the reign of the dinosaurs over 66 million years ago never happened. As a result, the evolution of life on Earth changed dramatically. Humans, if they existed at all, would have to share the planet with the dominant creatures of the prehistory age. Before us opens a fascinating thought experiment. What would landscapes, ecosystems, human society, and technology look like in a world where the Tyrannosaurus never vanished from the surface of the Earth? Watch until the end, because this is not just about predators and chaos. We'll also explore the cultural and technological transformations that might have arisen from the constant presence of these giant reptiles. The questions we ask do not have clear answers, but this hypothetical adventure might forever change how you see what really happened in prehistory. So get ready, because we are about to enter a world that never was, but very well could have been. If the asteroid had never struck Earth, dinosaurs would have remained the dominant animals on the planet, and mammals would likely have continued to play only a marginal role as small, nocturnal creatures. The absence of extinction would have drastically slowed or entirely halted the evolution of primates, and with that, the rise of humans. The evolutionary branches that led to hominids would have been heavily suppressed by the constant competition and predation from larger, far more powerful reptilian rulers of the land. No stone tools, no campfires, no cave paintings. The human species might never have emerged at all. Even if a form of intelligent life similar to humans had managed to evolve, it would have needed to be perfectly adapted to an environment full of danger. Evolution might have produced a species with exceptionally sharp vision, extraordinary stealth capabilities, and a high level of collective intelligence. The emergence of civilization would have been extremely slow and risky. Every step toward agriculture, construction, or technology would have been marked by the need to coexist with predators that never disappeared. The global landscape would look completely different. Savannas, as we know them today, would likely not exist. They would be trampled flat by herds of gigantic herbivores. Tropical and subtropical zones would cover most of the planet, as these warm-blooded giants would need a stable climate with ample food. Forests would not be ruled by deer or wolves, but by herds of hadrosaurs, while marshlands would harbor reptiles like Spinosaurus. In the oceans, marine reptiles would reign supreme, and in the skies, pterosaurs. Fish populations would evolve under constant pressure from massive predators, leading to the emergence of extremely fast and well-defended species. The Earth's biosphere would be vastly more feral and likely less stable. Food chains would be fragile, as most of the biomass would be channeled toward supporting the massive bodies of dominant species. Technological advancement in this world would be not only difficult but also incredibly slow. Imagine trying to build a city while giant horned ceratopsians roam the surroundings, or trying to invent the wheel when a carnivorous allosaurus bursts into your territory. Humans would have to develop entirely different engineering methods focused on protection against these creatures. Massive defensive walls, mobile shelters, or camouflage technology, for instance. Energy and innovation would likely be directed more toward defense than expansion. Electronics, machinery, and robotics would need to be extremely rugged and functional in a highly dangerous environment. Both air and land travel would be complicated by the presence of flying and terrestrial giants. Instead of progress toward globalization, civilization might retreat into isolated, heavily fortified urban enclaves. Dinosaurs would likely become deities, symbols of power or darkness. Civilizations would build myths, legends, and cults around them. A gigantic creature like Giganotosaurus might be worshipped as a destructive god, while a flying Quetzalcoatlus could be seen as a divine messenger or celestial being. Art, rituals, and architecture would all reflect the influence of these creatures. It's also possible that forms of coexistence would emerge. Humans might domesticate smaller species and use them for transport or defense. This would give rise to completely unique cultures, where dinosaurs would not only be predators but also allies. However, such relationships would be fragile and dangerous. Instead of dogs and horses, human settlements might be populated by feathered predators or small horned herbivores. The way people would build their homes would have to be fundamentally different. Open city spaces, parks, or unguarded low-rise buildings would not exist. All human settlements would need to be built on elevated platforms, in tree canopies, or high up in the mountains, where access for giant creatures would be limited. Streets would not be straight, but winding and interrupted by barriers designed to block the passage of large predators. Cities would resemble massive fortresses connected by suspension bridges, accessible only to humans. Construction materials would have to withstand shocks and tremors caused by the movement of massive bodies. Technologies like vibration damping, optical camouflage, or sound repellents would be standard infrastructure features. A completely different urban design style would emerge, not based on aesthetics or function, but on survival logic. Residential zones would be deeply secured, while industrial areas would operate under entirely separate rules in protected, heavily guarded locations. If dinosaurs had survived into modern times, there is a possibility that humans would have tried to tame them or establish some basic form of communication. The greatest hope would lie in smaller, more intelligent species with advanced social behaviors, particularly some bird-like theropods. Humans might have begun keeping these creatures in captivity, teaching them simple signals or sounds, and exploring ways to cooperate. The first successful domestication cases would represent a major breakthrough not only in transportation, but also in defense against larger predators. However, this would be an extremely risky process. Any failure in training could lead to fatal consequences. Moreover, it would never be truly safe. Domesticated dinosaurs could always escape human control. Culture and science would be fascinated by these efforts, and entire universities might specialize in the training, biology, and behavior of these prehistoric creatures. Ethical debates would also emerge about whether it is right to use potentially intelligent beings as beasts of burden. Military forces would need to completely rethink their approach to warfare. In a world where a battle could be interrupted by a pack of meter-long predators, or where an enemy might unleash a massive herbivore onto the battlefield like a living tank, traditional weapons would become ineffective. Specialized military units would be developed to neutralize or repel dinosaur threats. These units would employ heavy machinery, guidance systems, sonic disruptors, and advanced defense mechanisms. Conversely, some states or factions might use dinosaurs as part of their forces, train predators for offense, feathered creatures for patrol, or herbivores as mobile barricades against external threats. Military strategies would thus combine traditional technology with biological assets. A new kind of warfare would emerge, in which not just humans but also fauna would play a decisive role. Travel between regions would not be taken for granted. Roads, railways, and flight paths would have to be protected or perfectly concealed. Expeditions into uncharted territories inhabited by unknown species would be highly dangerous. Specialized exploration teams would form, combining natural science, survival skills, and military training. The world map would be divided into safe zones and wild areas dominated by merciless predators. Colonizing new lands would require not only ecological preparation, but also biological control, such as deploying repellents, managing local reproduction cycles, or even culling predators. The first steps of colonists would not aim to extract resources, but simply to survive. Every kilometer would have to be earned. The term conquering Earth would gain an entirely new meaning. In agriculture, dinosaurs would pose not just enormous competition, but a constant threat. Any attempt to grow crops could be destroyed within minutes if a herd of massive herbivores reached the fields. Protecting harvests would be a matter of life and death. Farmers would have to employ massive barriers, defense systems, or move their crops to elevated platforms accessible only to the smallest species. The development of agricultural techniques would be significantly hindered, and food supply chains would be unstable. Besides traditional farming, a completely different approach might emerge, raising dinosaurs as sources of meat, hide, or even energy. People might begin domesticating herbivores and using them as walking reservoirs of resources. However, this method would require vast areas, massive amounts of food, and complex systems to control the creatures. Food self-sufficiency would become a privilege of only the most advanced civilizations, while famine could be a common consequence of losing control over the fauna. In a world full of living dinosaurs, scientists would have an immense wealth of research material. Studying their DNA might uncover previously unknown biological mechanisms, such as regeneration, extreme disease resistance, or unique immune systems. These findings could lead to the development of new medications, vaccines, or even genome editing technologies. Research would also focus on using their blood proteins or tissues for pharmaceutical production. Beyond medicine, dinosaurs would become a major focus of robotics and biomechanics. Their movement, body structure, and coordination could inspire a new generation of machines and transport systems. The development of prosthetics, exoskeletons, or autonomous robots would draw directly from prehistoric models. The most prestigious research institutes might bear the names of dinosaur species, and scientists would become not only explorers but also protectors of these ancient creatures. A world with dinosaurs would be divided not only geographically, but also socially. Those with access to safer areas, fortified cities, or advanced technologies would live in relative peace. The rest of the population would be forced to survive on the fringes, constantly threatened by predators, disease, and a lack of resources. A new kind of caste system would emerge, not based on wealth or lineage, but on the ability to endure life in a world inhabited by colossal creatures. Access to education, healthcare, or food would depend on how far one lived from active dinosaur zones. Residents of these dangerous regions would be considered a lower class, often employed as hunters, trackers, or laborers constructing defensive structures. Deep inequality would lead to frequent unrest and constant redrawing of boundaries between the safe and the wild. Cultural expression would be radically different from what we know today. Instead of fantasy stories about dragons, people would write myths and novels about real-life escapes from predators. Dinosaurs would be omnipresent motifs in painting, music, dance, and film. Instead of superheroes, children's books would tell of brave individuals who survived velociraptor encounters or tamed a carnivore. Artistic styles would evolve in connection with the real shapes and movements of dinosaurs. Their bodies would become icons of beauty, power, and fear. Musical instruments might incorporate parts of dinosaur anatomy, horns, bones, or scales, not just for their sound but also their symbolic significance. The film industry would create dramatic works about expeditions into forbidden zones where humans face ancient beasts. Artists would draw inspiration from the immediate danger and fascination these creatures evoke. Dinosaurs would not be relics of the past, but foundational elements of creative thought. In a society where dinosaurs had never gone extinct, their presence would become a deeply rooted part of spiritual life. The ever-present force of these creatures, their incomprehensible size and wildness, would naturally lead to their deification. People would construct pantheons of gods centered around them, with each dinosaur species representing unique spiritual traits. Carnivorous predators might symbolize destruction, vengeance, or trials of fate, while gigantic herbivores could represent stability, fertility, or protection. Rituals, ceremonies, and burial traditions would be closely tied to dinosaurs. People might believe that after death, Their soul joins with a sacred dinosaur to protect their tribe or family. Temples would be constructed to mimic the forms of these beings, and spiritual leaders would wear ornaments made of scales, claws, or teeth. Religious wars might erupt over sacred lands where dinosaurs appear or where ancient spirits are believed to be born. The survival of dinosaurs would have a completely different impact on the climate and the planet's overall stability. Massive bodies require immense amounts of food and space, and their activities could lead to widespread ecosystem disruption. Mass migrations of herds would destroy vegetation. Altered migration routes could change river courses and cause soil erosion. The huge quantity of organic waste they produced would affect the chemical composition of the atmosphere and water. Climate change would be more frequent and less predictable. The extinction of a single species could trigger a domino effect throughout the food chain. Environmental preservation would become a matter of civilizational survival. Humans would be forced to become stewards of a dangerous balance, regulating migrations, controlling species reproduction, and intervening in natural cycles, or risk natural disasters that could threaten entire continents. In a world divided not just by cultures but also by types of dinosaurs, international relations would look entirely different. Each continent or nation would host different fauna, varying levels of threat, and different survival strategies. These differences would create unique geopolitical tensions. Diplomacy would involve not only trade or borders, but also predator migration management, herbivore control, and agreements on shared security zones. Diplomatic crises might erupt if a dangerous species crossed borders into a neighboring state. A new global organization, similar to the UN, could be created to monitor interspecies balance and manage international dinosaur law. Negotiations would take place on neutral ground, far from nesting areas and habitats of the most dangerous creatures. In addition to conventional weapons, biological factors would dominate global diplomatic discourse. For the average person, living with dinosaurs would mean a daily reality filled with both fear and fascination. Children would grow up knowing that beyond the city borders lurk creatures capable of killing them instantly. Simple routines like walking to school or an evening stroll would be unthinkable without protection, lights, or escorts. Homes would be equipped with predator alert systems, and schools would teach evacuation tactics alongside math and language. At the same time, dinosaurs would become everyday elements of culture. Pets might be miniaturized or genetically modified versions of more docile species. Markets would sell dinosaur-themed merchandise, souvenirs made from their scales, or meat from specially bred individuals. Advertising would feature their silhouettes as symbols of strength and prestige. And though the threat would be constant, people would adapt. Fear would become part of the everyday rhythm, like the weather.